Hello everybody. We are up to the very last chapter in John's Gospel. If you haven't watched the other videos, you might like to watch those before you watch this one, because then you'll know what happened in all the other chapters. This is the very last chapter, chapter 21. I'm going to put the Bible behind me. John says that some of Jesus' disciples were here. This is supposed to be the lake, and this is supposed to be the shore of the town called Galilee. And do you remember I showed you that picture in another video? That is a picture of the real lake. It's called the Sea of Galilee, the real Sea of Galilee. John also calls it the Sea of Tiberias. That's where we start our story. And actually, Jesus' disciples knew the Sea of Galilee very well, because some of them used to be fishermen, and they were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee before Jesus called them, before he first said to them, "Follow me." So it's a bit like we're back at the very beginning, but it's actually the last chapter. So John says that Simon Peter and Nathaniel, and Thomas, we heard about him last time, didn't we? Thomas, called the twin, and the sons of Zebedee, who were also known as James and John, and two others of Jesus' disciples were beside the Sea of Tiberias, beside the Sea of Galilee. And Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And the disciples said, "We'll come with you." So they got into a boat. Seen that boat before, haven't we? They got into the boat. And we'll sit down so we get in. There they go. Thomas. They all got into the boat. They had their nets with them. Put the net into the sea. Should we put the boat so it's sailing onto the sea? Sailing onto the sea. There we go. They put the net into the sea, and they sailed around all night. But John says that night they caught nothing. Then John says that just before daybreak, saw someone standing on the beach, still on the lake. There they are, still on the lake. And then someone shouted to them, "Children, have you caught any fish? You haven't caught anything, have you?" And the disciples said, "No." So someone shouted, "Throw your net onto the right side of the boat. Then you will catch something." So the disciples got the net again. There it is. Got the net again. And they threw it onto the other side of the boat, just like the stranger had said. And this time, can you see? This time, the net was full of fish. Full of fish. John says there were 153 fish in that net. It was full of fish. And John says that the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And when Peter heard the disciple say, "It is the Lord," John says he put on his clothes because he was naked, and he jumped into the sea. He jumped into the sea. And John said that meanwhile, the disciples followed behind to the shore. And when they had got to the shore, they saw a charcoal fire. And the charcoal fire had bread and fish cooking on it. And Jesus, because they knew it was him, Jesus called to them, "Come and have breakfast. Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So the disciples hauled the net to the shore. Hauled the net to the shore. There they all are. They hauled the net to the shore. And John says that after breakfast, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon Peter, do you love me more than these?" And Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And then Jesus said to Peter a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Tend my sheep." And then Jesus said to Peter a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And John says that Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" Can you think of another time when Peter was asked a question 3 times? Here's a little clue. It was a time when Peter was sitting by another charcoal fire. Can you remember when that was? Can you remember what happened then? But Jesus did say to Peter a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And then Jesus said to Peter, "When you were young, you used to put on your own belt and you used to go where you wanted to go. But when you're old, someone else will lead you and they'll take you somewhere you don't want to go. Follow me." And John says that Jesus said that to show to Peter how in his life he was going to glorify God. Then John says that Peter turned round and he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" And Jesus said, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You are to follow me." And John says, because Jesus said that, lots of Jesus' disciples thought that he meant that this disciple wouldn't die. But John says he didn't mean that. He didn't say he wouldn't die. He just said to Peter, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." And then John says, there are lots of stories that are written in this book. And this story is written by the one that Jesus was talking about. This one is writing these things, said John, to bear witness to the truth. And then, John says, Jesus did many other things. John says, if all the things that Jesus did were written down, I don't think that all the books in the whole world would be long enough to contain them. It's like all the stories about Jesus, John says, they wouldn't fit into all the books in all the world because there are so many amazing stories. And that is the end of John's Gospel. I was thinking, the next lot of stories that we're going to hear are going to start in a couple of weeks. And I was thinking that you might like, in the next couple of weeks, to have a think about the stories that we've heard so far. Maybe you might want to watch them again. And maybe if you know other stories from the Bible, you want to have a think about those too. And I wonder, especially if you're thinking about the stories that we've heard from John's Gospel, I wonder if you could be a bit of an investigator, a bit of a Bible investigator. I'm going to get the Bible. If we really want to understand the Bible and to think about the Bible, do you remember I said it's like looking like through a kaleidoscope? You can think about it through all your life, I think, and you'll never, ever, ever finish thinking. To me, that's the wonderful thing about it. But if you want to understand a little bit more about the Bible, you want to understand a little bit more about what the writers of the Bible, people like John, people like Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, people like them, if you want to understand a little bit more about how they might have been thinking and what they might have been trying to say, a really good way to start to understand a little bit more is to think about the stories and to think, is there something in the story that I have just heard that reminds me of another story in the Bible? Is there something in one story, and I'll give you a suggestion of a place to start. I showed you, do you remember, there was bread and fish on that charcoal fire. Can you remember another story, and we've done it on the video, can you remember another story where there's bread and fish? When John wrote his gospel, he was thinking about the other stories in the Bible, the other stories that he knew. And he was especially thinking, I think, about a story. You're going to have to remember which one it was. But it is a story that comes at the very beginning, but I think there's the contents of the Bible, all the stories. Now there's a little clue. A little clue. The story that comes at the very beginning of the Bible, John, I think, was especially thinking about one story. I wonder if you can think what that story might have been. See if any grown-ups know. Which story comes at the very beginning of the Bible? And are there little things to remind us of that story in John's Gospel? Here's another clue. The story that I am thinking of the very beginning of the Bible has a garden in it. Not a garden with a tomb, but it has a garden. And John has a garden as well. I think John wants us to think about a first story and then to think about Jesus' story and our story. And I wonder if he wants us to understand that just like Jesus gave Peter a new start, just like he said to him at the end, "Follow me," even though he knew what had gone wrong before, I think John wanted us to understand that the message of the stories about Jesus is that God always gives us a new start in our lives. God always forgives us, and he always says to us, just like it's the first time, "Follow me." Have a little think, if you can remember, what story especially John might have been thinking about, a story that comes at the very beginning. That's a story where things go wrong. And John's Gospel is a story where things go wrong, but at the end, things start again. And they start again in a wonderful way, in the new life that Jesus gives us. I'm going to say a prayer. If you'd like to make it your prayer, you can say Amen at the end. Dear Jesus, thank you for all the stories in the Bible. Thank you for the people who wrote them down, the people who prayed and thought and who wanted and who tried to help people understand you and help people understand that you love us and that you give us a new start in our lives, even when things go wrong. Thank you for that good news. Amen. So the next time I see you, we're going to start a whole new part of the Bible. See you next time. Bye.